This is Fake Zappa with another reading from the Real Frank Zappa book by Frank Zappa and blah, 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 blah. And I will begin with a review on Scamazon.com from somebody named The Book Bomber. Love reading about the music. First 60% of the book, but it goes downhill from there. Reviewed from the United States on August 31st, 2014. Love Frank, but mostly his music. Therefore, I was really into the book till about page 199. After that, it was more about his political and social insights. Interesting stuff. I've heard many of them before, but not why I came here. I came here for the music, and 60% of the book does not disappoint. And then he goes on and on, and, well, not on and on. There's a lot we don't hear about post-mothers, the various band members and their stories, the recording of the music during those later years. Basically, walk it, you walk it to the date of the writing of the Real Frank Zappa book. I'm really not interested in those road stories. What beer does to Americans, schmucks, porn wars, very irrelevant with the MP3s being popular today, the church and state, and then it goes on a little bit. Overall, I enjoyed the book. Thus, the 4 stars. Thanks, Frank. Rest in peace, brother. Which is why I'm going to take you to page 199, where he starts talking about his dad. Now, was their name actually Zappa? There was a guy, I won't tell you his last name, but his first name, I'll kid you not, was Beecher. And he lived far up north, like really, really far up north, and was a full-fledged alcoholic and a preacher. And Beecher told me, and he looked me right in the eyes with his evangelical fervor, as his generation still does, try to educate me about who Frank Zappa really is. And he looked at me and he said, his real name wasn't Frank Zappa. His real name was Ruben Sanchez. So, this is a chapter for his dad, Mr. Sanchez himself. Chapter 9, the history of the world according to our beloved Sicilians. So here's Sicily, if you can see that. And here is commerce, trade routes, justice, fashion, goodwill, recipes, romance, religious wisdom, etc. My dad had a top secret security clearance when he worked at Edwards Air Force Base in 1956 to 1959. During that period, I kept getting thrown out of high school, causing him to worry about a reduction in his classification, maybe even the loss of his job altogether. He told me at the time that if I were just to settle down and get good grades, maybe he would send me to Peabody Conservatory in Maryland, probably thinking, well, it's a music school. He wants to do something in music. He doesn't want to be an engineer. Let's give him this to keep him quiet. But by then, I had gotten to hate, quote, education, end quote, so much. I was so fed up with going to school, any school, conservatory or not. I didn't want any part of it. I think my dad was an interesting man, even if I didn't get along all that well with him. He was good at mathematics. He wrote and published himself a small book on gambling probabilities. One thing he always wanted to do was write a history of the world with Sicily as the hub. Can you imagine a guy from Rome would laugh at that idea, and why people in Italy think of Sicilians the way Romans think of everybody else? Mostly, I tried to stay out of his way, and I think he tried to stay out of mine as much as he could. After I got into show business and made some money, I bought a house for my parents. And at that point, I guess they thought it was sort of okay. And the book gets more downhill from here.
Power off.
Page 200. And I'm removing my hosiery, and I have tequila in a woof mug with stevia strawberry soda. My dad died while I was on the road. We were working at the Circle Star Theater in Phoenix, Arizona in 1973. Gail made the funeral arrangements in my absence, and still tells the story of the guy from the funeral parlor who had a silver shovel for a tie clip. Here's a tie clip, and there's the silver shovel. My mother seems to like it if she sees my name in papers, and if she sees me on TV and thinks it's good. But she's a devout Catholic, so who can tell what she really thinks about what I do or the things I say? I feel that if you live life in the pursuit of, quote, certification, end quote, appreciation, end quote, or compensation, end quote, in any form of your parents, you're making a big mistake. The sooner you can say, okay, they're them and I'm me, and let's make the best of it, the better off you're going to be. We could improve worldwide mental health if we acknowledge that parents can make you crazy. I believe that to a certain extent. Kids get weird because their parents make them weird. Parents have more to do with making their children weird than TV or rock and roll records. The only other thing that makes them weirder than TV and parents is religion and drugs. Here's a quote from his dad. That's something he told Frank when he was a kid. All the old history was written for the amusement of the ruling classes. The lower classes couldn't read, and their rulers didn't care about remembering what happened to them. Over the years, my interest in history has grown to the point that I can almost comprehend my dad's fascination with it. He never managed to write his Sicilian history of the world, but since I got in a couple hours here, let's try to approach it with rock and roll as the historical focal point. The entire world, a short history, and if you see, there are pictures of before and after. Before, boo, no, go away, and then after, oh, rock me now, yeah, good boy. Okay, we're pretending to be serious now. Popular music tells us something about popular culture, which tells us something about popular thought processes, or the absence thereof. Rock and roll, when rock and roll first appeared, adults were completely hostile towards it. Now they aerobicize to it. 1989. The people who performed it, as well as its customers, were thought of in the beginning of an undesirable social movement. Then the 60s came along, and wonder of wonders, natives from a miserable little island off the coast of France reinvented the wheel and rolled it back in our direction, right over our foot, with a sickening crunch. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones became household words in America. The British invasion introduced us to the concept of self-contained singing band. Singing bands who played their own instruments were not common in the United States at that time. We had surf music. Up until then, rock records were made either by soloists or groups of vocalists backed by anonymous guys who attempted to operate musical instruments. The success of the British groups forced a change in the way new American groups were put together. They now had to be self-contained because every bar that hired live music wanted its own little U.S. version of the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. During this period, it was discovered that millions, perhaps billions of dollars could be made by selling circular pieces of black plastic in cardboard sandwiched with a stupid picture on the front. In the beginning, the big bucks, double quote, were made by low-life chiselers who screwed doo-wop groups out of their royalties. While the chiselers played golf, the singers vanished into Never Never Land of needles and cookers. The 70s came along. By then, the captains of corporate America had conceived themselves that they had the answer. And so, it came to pass that the world was introduced to the warmth and sincerity of corporate rock. Corporal rock mutated into disco and developed on the archetypal assumption that music by non-people is better and cheaper than music originating from the alternative source. All those nice men who owned the bars and clubs were groups used to develop, stopped hiring musicians and replaced them with record players, big speaker systems, and twinkling lights. Disco satisfied social as well as musical needs. Disco people got to dress up all the time and go to places if the guy at the door let them in, where everybody sort of looked good. And later, after an evening of chemical alteration, everybody looked even better. And the next thing they knew, they were getting the blowjob. Punk in the late 70s purported to be a rebellion against that sort of silly behavior. Manic bands started thrashing away in dingy little places with no decor, developing their own silly behavior. Yes, punk rock took us back to the energetic roots of rock and roll and its mysterious accounting procedures. The guys with the safety pins in their noses probably netted less than their doo-wop junkie ancestors. New wave evolved from punk, basically by sterilizing its own safety pin. Newly glammed punkers sang yum yum as they assumed the position, once again sucking the corporate hooter. It's a crusty nozzle emerging from a space cloth nursing bra at this time. Page 203. Listen to those clothes. No change in musical style will survive unless it is accompanied by a change in clothing style. Rock is to dress up too. No musical innovation will ever succeed on a large commercial scale without the full involvement of the industries which profit tangentially from it, clothing and merchandise. And now, death by nostalgia. Up to the minute nostalgia contest yesterday, tomorrow. Says canceled. The really big news of the 80s is the stampede to regulate mildly camouflage musical styles of previous decades and ever-shrinking styles of nostalgia. It isn't necessary to imagine the world ending in ice or fire. There are two other possibilities. One is paperwork and the other is nostalgia. When you compute the length of time between the event and the nostalgia for the event, the span seems to be about a year less in each cycle. Eventually, within the next quarter of a century, the nostalgia cycles will be so close together that people will not be able to take a step without being nostalgic for the one they just took. At that point, everything stops. Death by nostalgia! I don't know. One of the good things that happened in the 60s was at least some music of an unusual or an experimental nature got recorded and released. Except the Wild Flowers. W-I-L-D-E. So, who were those wise, incredibly creative executives that made this golden era possible? Hip young guys with Perrier breath? No! They were cigar chomper guys who listened to the tapes and said, I don't know. Who knows what the fuck this is? Go ahead. Put it out there. Who knows? I don't know. 204. We were better off with that attitude than we are now. The bright young men are far more conservative and more dangerous than the old guys ever were. So, how did the new guys get in there? Some got in because their dad was one of the old guys. Some of them actually worked their way in. The guy with the cigar said one day, Sherman, look, I took a chance. It went out there. Next thing I know, it sold a few million units. I still don't know what the fuck this shit is, but we gotta do some more. I tell you, Sherm, I need some advice. Why don't we get one of those hippie bastards in here? So they hire a hippie bastard not to do anything big, just carry the coffee, bring the mail, stand around, and look happening. So one day the old guy says, Sherman, listen, I think we can trust him. He looks like he's happening. We'll make him an A&R man. Let him talk to these stupid fuckers with the tambourine and incense. He understands this shit. He's got the same hair. From there, he's moving up and up. Next thing you know, he's got his feet on the desk. And he's saying, get rid of Sherman, Ms. Maxwell, and, oh, that new group? We can't take a chance on them, ... It's just not what the kids really want. I know. I got the same hair! Things will not improve until those cocksuckers move back to Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. There is nothing to be said for an executive who is willing to take a chance on an idea, even if he doesn't look like or understand it. The new guys don't have that spirit. They are forever looking over their shoulder. Remember when they used to have the same hair? All that shit they stuck up their nose made it fall out a couple years ago. The economics of artistic freedom. Some parts of this section were derived and edited from a transcript from a CNN interview with Sandy Freeman on October 31st, 1981. Because of the things which were said about the Reagan administration, I feel that CNN tried to bury this interview. Instead of running it in the show's normal afternoon time slot, they ran it at midnight on Halloween, the same time MTV was broadcasting our live concert. When we talk about artistic freedom in the country, we sometimes lose sight of the fact that freedom is often dependent on adequate financing. If you have an idea for an innovation, for instance, you need the tools and the machinery to build it. You may have the freedom to think it up, but if you don't have the financial freedom to construct it. The same thing goes for artistic projects. You may have a great idea for an opera, but you won't be able to mount it unless you pay the graft for the unions which service the arts. This is, for me, one of the most depressing aspects of the contemporary American life. The negative way in which unions have impacted on the quality of the arts. Unions, through their PR firms, perpetrate the myth that America is a unionized country and that all the unions are there to fight for the working man and woman. Maybe in the beginning the unions did support the workers, but what they have turned into is a network of organizations that take money from working class people to finance baking scheme which often benefits organized crime. In the case of the arts, I have experienced situations in which union stagehands were paid astonishing amounts of money for doing nothing. In some instances, they actually degraded the quality of the live shows they were hired to work on. Many locals operate by extortion. subjecting touring groups to interpretations of interpretations of regulations that border on science fiction. Let's say you want to do a live recording at a hall. A representative from the union will come up to you and say, you can't turn your you can't turn your recording equipment on unless you pay us $300. For what? You say. For extra union fees. Fees for what? Oh, because we have to pay this special rate for these men who are standing around here. But for what? Well, that's just what the union says, and if you don't pay, we'll stop the show. Would they stop the show? You bet! In some instances, if I think the show is important enough to record, and there is no recourse, I pay. In other instances, I don't pay, and don't record. This happened to us not long ago in Chicago. The union wanted to stick us with a $3,000 surcharge for recording. I was supplying all the labor for the recording from my crew. It was my recording equipment and my engineering staff. Why should I have to pay an extra fee to a bunch of guys who are sitting around eating sandwiches, who care nothing about what I'm doing and will do nothing to enhance the quality of it? They're not putting in an extra second of work or an extra ounce of muscle power. And it's not just Chicago. Whatever happened to the Halloween shows? The last time we played the Palladium in New York City, before they made a disco out of it, was for a live simulcast on MTV Halloween show in 1981. Westwood One was broadcasting it live on the radio. I was providing the audio feeds for MTV and the radio through my recording truck. MTV, Westwood One, and I were each billed 100% extra for stagehand costs. For yet another bunch of guys who did absolutely nothing. My road crew moved the equipment in and out and operated it. I said, okay, but that's it. I'm never coming back here. They weren't doing that many live events at the Palladium then, so I guess they thought it over for a minute. Since my band had been a regular attraction there every year at Halloween, and they wanted to keep the business, so they offered to give me a $2,000 rebate out of the stagehand bill that came to $9,000. I said, no thanks. Remember, each of us, MTV, Westwood One, and my company was billed $9,000. A total of $27,000 for one night's non-work. Honesty. A quaintly outmoded concept. I realize that a lot of people feel that speaking out against the unions is almost un-American. I remind them, not all of America is unionized. In fact, the vast majority of Americans are not, and glad about it. Some people fear that if the unions were to vanish, the labor situation would return to the way it was in the beginning, with child labor and sweatshops. I agree with them. Large employers do tend towards unscrupulous behavior when nobody's looking over their shoulder. So, what's the bottom line here? I would like to see more honesty in business at both ends of the table. Honesty in U.S. business appears at its lowest ebb in history. There are a number of reasons why for that. When political leaders do not demonstrate honesty, when people lie constantly in the media, everybody gets used to the big lie as a way of life. At that point, honesty becomes a quaintly outmoded concept. Nobody wants to be honest anymore, because if they are, they might finish last. I would say that today, dishonesty is the rule, and honesty is the exception. It could be statistically that more people are honest than dishonest, but the few that are really control things are not honest, and that tips the balance. I don't think we have an honest president. I don't think that he is surrounded by honest people. I don't believe that most of the people in Congress or the Senate are honest. I don't think that most people who head up businesses are honest. We have let them get away with it because we're not honest enough to face up to the fact that we are owned and operated by a bunch of really bad people. Just listen to that budget. When the risks of creating a successful entertainment object are increased by high production costs, committees, and the pitiful decisions they make always flourish. Committees make it possible for incompetent corporal weasels to maintain their perks, and the fiction of fiscal prudence while spending mega budgets on sure thing movies, sure thing Broadway shows, and sure thing recording artists. The sure thing is called a sure thing because it has been outfitted with the insurance policy, the committee itself. Nobody on it ever going to be held responsible for anything. So what can go wrong? Is it any wonder that project after project devolves into putrid nothingness with more on the way in order to merchandise whatever it was that met with everyone's approval? The committee must spend even more time and money to make sure nobody finds out that there was ever such a thing as good stuff. So, explaining that this is a matter of national security, it enlists the aid of the federal government, perhaps a covert operation or two, to obliterate any criteria by which a consumer might recognize how shitty the new stuff really is. Fade up the battle hymn of the Republic. Mass applause. There are millions of people who love music but have tastes which differ from the corporate ideal. That's where independent labels come in. However, unless the independent is distributed through a major label, chances are the retailer is not going to pay on his 90-day account unless the independent has another hit coming in the door next month. The independent usually doesn't. But the major label might. And it is this leverage that gets the bills paid. The major labels are more interested in merchandising than music. The idea is to get one blockbuster, monster, motherfucker hit album every year. Corporate wisdom dictates that if any one guy sells 30 million records, when the kids come into the store and buy the big hit, they'll also pick up something else. This is called a traffic builder. Ever wonder why every year at the Grammys one guy screws up all the awards? This is a complicated picture. I don't know if I want to describe it. We have the mad scientist at the computer. They like it. And it's going through a fan exciting new entertainment object is what this thing is here. And they got people with brain probes. And this is the New Perfect America. Oh, I need my new Perfect America products. Yay. Page 211 is going to be chapter 10. The one you've been waiting for. And unfortunately, the book, my Bible, my first Bible, is beginning to tear even more.